It's listener Q&A day on the podcast. Dudes and dudettes, welcome back to The Anxious Truth. This is episode number 162. We are recording in June 2021, and I had to go back into the archives. I think I've only done this twice before, two other times in over 160 episodes, which is not nearly enough. I need to do more of these, where I had you guys sending questions and I answered them as on the podcast. I should do this at least once every 3 months, once every quarter. I really should, because it's good. You always send in good questions. It's a fun way to do this, fun way to answer them. And yeah, so we're going to do one today. I asked you guys on Instagram to either leave me voice messages with questions, and we'll have a few of those, or just send in questions like kind of the old-fashioned way through responding to my Instagram story. So we're going to answer a few of those too. But before we get started, I want to tell you about a new project. Again, this is June 2021. And instead of telling you about the book that I usually tell you about, I'm going to tell you about my new one, which is called 7% Slower. And 7% Slower is a little mental trick I came up many years ago during my recovery, just to remind myself to be aware of my propensity to speed up and rush around and go at like light speed and speed demon mode when I was anxious and afraid and stressed. And 7% Slower was a little trick that I came up with to recognize that and to slow myself down. Now, that's not going to cure your anxiety, of course, but learning to recognize when you're speeding up and then learning to slow things down a little bit can really go a long way toward getting you down the path to recovery. So I started talking about it on social media not too long ago. Everybody seems to love the concept of 7% Slower. So I'm turning it into a book. I'm writing it right now. It's going to be a short one, not the giant 400-page behemoth like The Anxious Truth. So it'll be a nice, short, easy read, very accessible, friendly, full of little tips and tricks for slowing down. It's called 7% Slower, and if you want to know more about it, or get on my mailing list so that you can get some samples of the book and know when it comes out, hopefully late September, October 2021, head on over to my website, theanxioustruth.com/SPS. 7% Slower, SPS. So go check it out. I'm having a good time writing it, and hopefully you guys will have a good time reading it. So go check it out and get on my mailing list so that you know when the book is available, because it's going to be good. It's really going to be good. So let's get into the Q&A. I want to take a few voice questions. Some folks asked me questions via the voice messaging system on Anchor. And Anchor is the company that hosts my podcast, which is really cool. So we're going to get into the first one. I'm not going to say anybody's names because I didn't say that I would, but I will play the questions for you, and then I will answer them. So let's take the first one. Here we go.
I have a few different diagnoses. So I have diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and OCD. What I find tricky, and this might be the OCD stepping in here, but is to know how to respond to different symptoms. Like, I find it difficult to discern between what's a depressive symptom that might require a certain response, what's an anxiety symptom that might require a certain response, what's an OCD symptom that might require a certain response. I think there might be a lot of trying to figure it out, which is possibly not the one, but any assistance here would be very helpful. Thanks.
All right. That is an excellent question. Thank you for sending it in. I'm not going to say who did it because, like I said, I didn't say I was going to tell anybody's names on the air, so I won't do that. I think I can answer that question by saying, first of all, a lot of times the diagnosis gets really overblown. A lot of people get really stuck on what my diagnosis is. This is my diagnosis. What does it mean that I got diagnosed with this, that, or the other? And a lot of instances, it doesn't mean a whole lot, to be completely honest with you. Diagnosis is a label that helps the clinician, it helps the insurance company, and it sort of informs the direction that you're going to go in terms of dealing with the with the particular problem. But the diagnosis isn't always prescriptive in terms of, like what this person asked, well, then this should tell me like exactly what I should do in any given circumstance, because this must be OCD and this must be GAD and this must be depression. It doesn't always work that way, all right? So to answer this question, I'm going to break out the depression by itself first. So the depressive symptoms of depression, what you're looking out for there really is when you're just not feeling anything. Depression isn't feeling sad, right? So that's a common misconception. Depression is not equal to feeling sad. Depression is a lot of times feeling nothing. So people who are clinically depressed with that, major depressive diagnosis will feel nothing, not just sadness. They will feel nothing. So it's not just a low mood, but when you feel yourself getting into that situation where you're really having a hard time feeling anything, you're just feeling dead, Things are looking kind of dark. You start losing your connection with the people around you and the things in your life. Those are signs of depression, not feeling bad, not feeling down, not a low mood. But when you start to feel those sort of things, that's when you got to start getting into action, right? So we talk about challenging depression all the time. So in that situation, you have to start to move yourself, literally, physically move yourself and start to accomplish the littlest things that you can get yourself to do. If all you could do is get yourself out of bed and brush your teeth and comb your hair and get dressed, that's a good thing to do to respond to depression. We always challenge, I know therapists will call it behavioral activation. So you're challenging depression. When depression says do nothing, just lay there, do nothing, just lay there and be dead, you have to do the opposite of that, which is to start to do something, anything. Move your body, get out in the sun, interact with people. In a lot of ways, you're faking it because you don't really want to do those things, but you're always challenging the depressive symptoms when those things come up. All right, so that's that. As far as what is OCD and what is GAD and what is anxiety, that's where it starts to really get fuzzy. And I think you actually kind of answered the question near the end of your own question when you said, this is probably a little bit of trying to figure it out. And that's exactly what it is. So you're falling into the trap a little bit of thinking that each thing that you feel will fit into a particular category. Oh, this is an OCD thing, so I do this. This is a GAD thing, so I do this. This is a depression thing, so I do this. It doesn't always work that way. It just doesn't. So I think part of the issue here is you have to back away from the idea that I can categorize my symptoms, I could categorize how I feel, I could categorize my thoughts, and then follow the recipe book for what I do with each one of those things. When you say that you've been diagnosed with GAD, I'm not necessarily surprised because that's one of the hallmarks of people who have generalized anxiety disorder. You're probably a problem solver, right? So you think that you can organize this and know everything there is to know about it and make sure you're ready and have a plan and execute that plan and always be watching for which play you're supposed to run now and what recipe book you're supposed to, recovery recipe you're supposed to be making at the moment. You got to back away from that a little bit because that's not required, nor is it really practical necessarily. And it's going to drive you a little more crazier than it's going to help you. So essentially the rule of thumb with the anxiety stuff is to allow it to be there and disengage from it. So on the GAD side, you're trying to disengage from the very behavior you're talking about here, which is the thinking and analyzing and trying to figure out. And of course, with the OCD, assuming you've been diagnosed, so I assume you're working with a therapist, you know that you've got ERP work to do, right? So you don't have to, don't look for a specific recipe. It's not like that. It's not a computer program. So know when depression is depression and act accordingly there. But with the anxiety stuff, you have to just stop trying to figure it out and then follow your ERP program that your therapist is giving you for your OCD for sure. And back away from this need to try and problem solve on the GAD side. But I can't tell you this is this symptom, this is that symptom, run this play, run that play. Nobody can tell you that really. So that's part of the problem. Good question. Excellent question. So let's go on to the next one real quick. We'll do another voice question. I'll move over to some of the Instagram questions, but let's hear what this next question is all about.
Hey Drew, I want to start off by saying thank you for writing such an amazing and informative book, and your podcasts have helped me tremendously. My question for you is, I tend to notice I turn a bad day into what could be a bad couple days or a bad week. I notice as soon as I hit a bad day, I obsess and obsess until I dig myself into this deep hole. And I was wondering if you had any advice on how to not let yourself get into that deep hole.
All right. That's another really good question. And I think if you're listening to the podcast, I bet you can relate to that. So thank you for the question. Really good. For me, in my own personal experience, and I can relay the experience of the thousands of people I have the privilege of watching going through this as they go through their recovery. The secret to not having a bad day turn into a bad week, and believe me, that used to be me. One of the most popular podcast episodes I did, by the way, if you go to the website, theanxioustruth.com, and search for critical decision or the word decision, you'll see, I think it was called The Biggest Decision You Need to Make. And then there's another one called Critical Moment of Decision. And essentially, both of those talk about this particular issue, which is you have a bit of a bad day, which means, first of all, you have to define that. That means you were feeling anxious. Maybe you had a panic attack that day. Maybe you were kind of dogged by your thoughts that day, scary and intrusive thoughts. Okay, we can call that a bad day. That's totally fine. But how does that not turn into a bad week? Well, when you, well, how do I stop obsessing over it? And that is that you have to choose how you're going to react to that or not react to that. And I know that this is going to be like, sound like a broken record because it's the same thing that I say all the time. But when you are starting to feel like I'm having a bad day, and that means I must be on the lookout for more bad days, and if it's going to come, and is it over yet? And am I capable? Is this going to overwhelm me? Am I going to be able to handle this? When you get into that mode, that's the time to start to act. So the way we stop like digging ourselves a hole where one bad day becomes 7 bad days in a row is through action, right? So, okay, I had a bad day, or I'm having a bad day. What can I do right now that is not just sitting here analyzing my bad day, right? So how do I stop obsessing? You literally have to decide, I'm going to engage in something else right now. I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to walk my dog. I'm going to take a shower. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to watch a movie. And yes, while you're doing those things, you will probably keep looping back into scanning. How am I feeling now? How is this going? Oh my God, that was terrible. You're just going to have to keep resetting that and going back into what you're doing at that moment. So the best advice I could give you to stop that cycle that turns a bad day into a bad week is to begin to act in opposition to what your anxiety is telling you to do. So your anxiety is telling you to sit still and analyze, right? And just scan. And has it gone now? How am I feeling now? Oh my God, this is going to keep going. When your anxiety is telling you to sit still, scan, and focus inward on how you feel, you must act in opposition, which is get up, move, and focus outward, right? Start to engage with the world. Again, even if you're sort of faking it, and not because you want to drown out the anxiety, the symptoms or the thoughts, but because you need to see that you can actually function even when you feel those things. That's super important. So how do you break that obsession cycle, or the obsessive scanning and analyzing and looking at how you feel that turns a bad day into a bad week? Through action. And that is, generally speaking, opposite action. So instead of just sitting there and thinking, you're going to have to start to actually do things. Even though they might feel really difficult and scary to do at that moment, you got to do them anyway. And they could be really small things. You don't have to get off your sofa and like climb Mount Everest. You could just engage in the simplest things of taking care of yourself, feeding yourself, like I said, reading a book, taking care of your dog, your pets, your kids, interacting with a friend. Small things count. There's something other than just sitting and thinking about how you feel. That is, you have to break that cycle through action. I can't tell you any other thing about that. There's no thinking solution to this. There's only a doing solution to this. All right. So great question. I appreciate it. Let's move on to some of the questions that came in kind of OG way, the print way on Instagram. Let's see here. This was asked several other times. So I'm going to combine. A few people asked this question, so I'm going to paraphrase it. Do we really have to do nothing when panic comes? Is distracting yourself cheating? And a few of you asked a similar question about this. How do you do nothing? How can I possibly not react? And so the answer to this, first of all, distracting ourselves, is it cheating? I won't call it cheating. That's sort of not fair to yourself. If you're going to, call yourself a cheat, that's not okay, or I'm doing it wrong, or I'm failing. It's not optimal, I will tell you that. So when I say doing nothing sometimes literally means doing nothing. Sometimes that it does look that way, but sometimes doing nothing means just not doing anything to save yourself from the panic, right? That could be nothing also. So you could be doing nothing while doing stuff, just that the stuff that you're doing should not be specifically designed to get you to escape from panic, stop it in its tracks, get you away from it, and save yourself, right? So I'm not going to say that distraction is cheating, but distraction isn't optimal. So you don't want to launch into like a flurry of activity designed to distract yourself. If I could just distract myself, then it'll be fine. If you could just talk to me so I don't think about it, I'll be fine. No, you want to feel it. You need to feel it come, rise, peak, and fall off. But you can do that either by sitting quietly or standing quietly or resting quietly, which is almost literally doing nothing. You can do that. Or you can do nothing while being in motion. You might be driving the car. You might be in a conversation. You might be eating dinner. You might be in a meeting. You might be watching a movie. It could be anything. And you can continue to engage in that activity. And the nothing in that case, doing nothing, is just don't try to save yourself. Now, here's the secret sauce. That is the part where, yeah, that's really hard and really scary. So I understand, like, do we really have to do nothing when panic comes? I know why you're asking, and those of you who asked a variant of that question, because that's super hard and you're scared when you do that. right? So you don't want to do nothing. You want to do all your safety and soothing things. I understand. So I understand why you're asking that, but that's the answer. You kind of do have to do nothing, where nothing is defined as nothing to specifically save yourself from the panic. But nothing could look a lot of different ways depending on the context that you're in. Sometimes, like I said, doing nothing could literally mean laying on your bed and just breathing. That could be nothing. Or it could be continuing to just be in the class that you're in at the moment, or the meeting that you're in that moment, or doing the job that you're doing at that moment. Could be that too, right? So let's move on to another one. That's a really good question, by the way. And like I said, a bunch of you asked that. So I figured I would kind of kill a bunch of birds with one stone by answering it. Let's move on to this one. What are exposures for GAD, please? And this is a question I get asked all the time. So GAD exposures, if you heard the voice question that was left on Anchor, when that person said, well, this might be just me trying to figure it out, right? So that's GAD. With GAD, and I can't be super specific here because you might be a little bit different, but generally speaking, your exposure is to not do things. So GAD is generally driven by perfectionism, overthinking, overplanning, people-pleasing, where thinking is your primary coping mechanism for the universe. So when you think you have to think to find problems to solve, and then when you found them, you need to think to solve them, or you have to continually think and think and think and plan and analyze and ruminate in order to stay safe, which is really what that is. I solve my problems and I stay safe through my thinking behaviors. Your exposure really is to pull away from those things. So and how do we pull away from those things? We replace them with other activities. So this is kind of, very metacognitive, if you will. Like, you just have to start to understand your thinking style and the way you think. And then when you realize what's going on here, like, oh, that's right. I have a little of a maladaptive thinking style that says that thinking is my go-to for everything. And therefore I think about whatever it is. You have to disengage from that. Well, instead of thinking, I can make lunch right now. I can make lunch instead of thinking. I don't have to continually analyze what went on yesterday. I don't have to continually think about what might happen tomorrow. None of those things. I don't have to do that. I could do other things. I could watch a movie. I could walk my dog. I could call a friend. I can go to class. I can do my homework. I can read a book. I can do all of those things. So your exposure is disengaging from that protective thinking, planning, overthinking, overplanning, that mechanism that you have in place that's probably driving that anxiety all the time. Your job is to disengage from that. You don't have to figure everything out. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to solve everything, and you don't have to plan for every possible contingency. So the exposure for GAD is to drop those habits. It's hard because when you stop planning and planning for contingencies and analyzing and trying to know things, you will feel vulnerable and anxious and unsafe and like you're doing something wrong and irresponsible. But those are what GAD exposures look like. Usually it's the opposite. You are learning to not do things by replacing those thinking habits with behaving habits, right? So it's a little bit more than I can really go into in depth in a quick, answer here, but that's what GAD exposures look like. So let's go on to another one, and then we'll do another voice question. We can do a few more questions because, like I said, I got to try and squeeze these all into a 30-minute podcast. But and this question, well, you know what? A couple of people answered this one. So let's do this one. How do you handle being agoraphobic and people being okay with doing things for you? This is a good question. So, and this is whether you're agoraphobic or you're dealing with any other variety of disordered anxiety, and the people in your life are trying to help you. They love you. They support you. They don't want you to feel bad. So they start to do things for you that you now are afraid to do. And agoraphobia, those are pretty easy and pretty, easy to see. Like, well, I can't do the shopping now. I can't take the kids to school. I can't drive here. I can't leave the house. So other people have to pick up the slack. When the people in your life are more than happy to do that for you, they mean well, right? They think they're helping you. But as the agoraphobic, part of your recovery is going to have to sit down with those people and say, look, I love you and I'm appreciative of you and I know you love me back and I know you're trying to help me, but I need to start to learn to do some of these things on my own. So you're going to see me do these things that are hard for me and will scare me, and it will be really difficult, and you're going to see me struggle to a certain extent. That's okay. I need to do this. So what I would tell you to do is to start taking back some of those tasks that people are doing for you. Decide, make your recovery plan and, that thing from the easiest stuff that you can do to the hardest stuff you can do, rank it and what's easiest, what's hardest, start to move up that ladder and start to take those tasks back from those people. But you're probably going to have to explain to them, I appreciate that you think you're trying to help me, but you're actually enabling the disorder. And I need to start to challenge this and do these things for myself so that I can learn that I don't have to be afraid of my anxiety. Right. So that's how I would deal with that. Let's do, this question was asked, actually the voice question. I'm going to play that in a second. There's a lot of questions. I'm not going to be able to answer all of them. I could do maybe a few more. So let me go back to Anchor here. And this question that I'm going to play that was sent in via voice was asked also by a bunch of people on Instagram. So let's take a listen.
Hi, I guess my question to you is, how do I stop overthinking that I'm going to have a terrible panic attack that's just going to make me lose control and end up like in the psych ward, or just one that I'm not able to come down from? That's been one of the hardest things that I've been dealing with anxiety, is just learning how to realize that that's not real, but somehow expecting it to happen later on as my life goes on. Any tips would be helpful, because I feel like every single panic attack I've experienced isn't as bad as like the one I might experience in the future that will like ultimately make me lose control. Thank you.
Okay. This question is another very common question. And thank you, by the way, for leaving the message and asking that question, because a bunch of other people also asked it. And this is a thing that comes up all the time, right, in the community surrounding the podcast. So if you're listening, odds are this pertains to you also. It is a common misconception that there is some special mythical amount of panic or level of panic that is out there in the darkness, right, in the shadows waiting for you. This is the special, epic, mega level of panic that you won't be able to actually handle, and it will break you. So that is a very, very common fear, that there is something out there. There's a panic attack out there. It's waiting. It's going to come, and that will be the one that breaks you. It breaks you physically. It breaks you psychologically, mentally, whatever it is. It incapacitates you permanently or in some very serious way. And the only thing that I could tell you is that that is absolutely incorrect. There is no operational path from anxiety to a panic attack to psychosis or a break with reality or a permanent incapacitation. There is no such thing. That does not exist. Having said that, you don't believe it. Or maybe you'll believe me for now until the podcast has ended in another 10 or 12 minutes, but you won't believe me then tomorrow or in an hour, and you'll be back to just believing that, well, it's out there and I'm not going to be able to handle it and I will go crazy. So here is the part that everybody hates when I answer this question this way. Go ahead and let that happen. Because part of the problem here is that you believe that, and so you are hanging on tighter and tighter and tighter. But you're hanging on like hot death to save yourself from a thing that doesn't exist and you can't see. So you will never be able to hang on enough to that, because no matter how much you fight and how hard you hang on, in your brain, there's always another level that you haven't reached yet, right? So number one, the physiology of panic and anxiety is limited. It has a limited range of things that it can do. So I would almost guarantee you that you have experienced already the full range of what adrenaline can do in the human body. Some of those adrenaline surges you have added more fear to, and so they felt more severe. Others you were able to tolerate a little bit more, so they didn't feel so bad. And so you think that there are levels of panic. Like, oh, I don't know, that one wasn't so bad, but that one last week, man, that was close. That was close to the big one. That almost did me in. That almost broke me. But that's not true. They're almost all the same. If you walked around connected to electrodes and measuring all of your physical functions, every time you panic, odds are those readings would all look the same. It's how you interpret those attacks that makes them seem different to you. So knowing that, what you have to do is just let it happen. This is the way this works. If you think there's a special level of panic that you have to stay on guard against to keep yourself from being permanently broken, you're going to have to let down your guard and stop trying to protect against that and go ahead and let it come and get you. So when you start to learn that, oh, wait, when I stop fighting this, I handle every panic attack, every one, then you start to build the confidence that tells you, oh, there is no such thing as panic that I can't handle. Right now, you think you're somehow magically handling it by doing whatever it is you do to get through it. Well, I'm okay as long as I just do this. I get through it. I sniff my oils. I snap my rubber bands. I call my mom. Whatever it is you're doing right now, and the things that you're avoiding in your life because you're so afraid of this mega monster panic that you think is stalking you, you think these are saving you, and therefore you think you have no control of what you can handle or not. So you're going to have to stop doing those things and show yourself experientially that, oh, I handle all of it. If I stop fighting and just let it come, I can surf that wave every single time. So that's how you do it. You have to stop fighting against that mystery panic that you think exists and trying to hold it off, because all the stuff you've been trying to do to get through your panic and trying to do to stay safe from that like mega like catastrophic panic attack is pointless anyway. It's not doing anything. It's actually not saving you from a damn thing because there's nothing to be saved from. So you're going to have to drop those behaviors and learn experientially that even if I do nothing, I get through all of these attacks, all of them, right? So I get through all of these experiences. That is the key. It's almost always the key, but I'm telling you that I'm not going to repeat it because I can tell you 100 times before the end of this podcast that there's no such thing as like going crazy from panic, but you won't believe it 10 minutes after the podcast ends. So you're going to have to change the way that you relate to your panic and anxiety so that you can learn that, teach your lizard brain experientially that that thing doesn't exist, that monster isn't out there, and I can handle all the panic that comes my way because I always have. And all the saving stuff has been nonsense. It hasn't done anything for me. That's what you need to learn. Okay, I can do two more. I'll do two more really quickly. One of them is a really good question. Name one positive that anxiety has given you. And this person says, remember, the gift is in the shit. And she's 100% right. So I'll do that. In the beginning of this podcast, I talked about the book 7% Slower that I'm writing, but the book that comes out after that is called Lessons from the Panic Zone, which is all about that, all about the lessons that I learned in recovery. Here's one positive thing that anxiety gave me that I got from having an anxiety disorder for so many years and from going through the recovery process. I learned accurate threat assessment in a big way. So what I mean by that, and I'll try to make this super fast, is when you're in the grips of anxiety, when you're in grips of disordered anxiety, OCD, panic disorder, agoraphobia, health anxiety, social anxiety, all of these, your threat assessment mechanism is so screwed up. It is so twisted and so distorted. Everything seems like a threat all the time. And I know that people understand this. Why does everything trigger me? Air quotes trigger, right? You've probably said that. This is crazy. Why does everything trigger me? You know, the sun goes behind a cloud, boom, I panic. My body temperature changes like half a degree, boom, panic. I eat something and my tummy rumbles, panic. I get in a fight with my boyfriend, panic. Something goes wrong at work, panic. Like I have a flat tire, panic. Why? Why is that? Because your threat assessment mechanism is off the rails, and it is constantly looking, and you are living a life where you think everything is a threat. Well, when you face that and you allow those alarms to be sound, boom, okay, go ahead. We're in danger again. Go ahead, amygdala. Go ahead, lizard brain. Tell me that I'm dying again. And you just ride through that without going through all the avoidance and escape and rituals that you've developed to deal with that. You start to learn really quickly, well, that wasn't a threat at all. That wasn't a threat. That wasn't a threat. That thing wasn't a threat. All those things that I thought were dangerous threats were not. Turned out not to be. And I will tell you that you gain a real appreciation for what actually is a threat in life. And what I mean by that is that there are very few times when I feel like I need to go to war over something. Very few. Like when you deal with that kind of off-kilter, messed up, twisted, distorted threat response for such like that disordered anxiety jams into your life. And I did it for a long time. When you finally quiet that down and go through the process of recovery, my discernment of what actually warrants a big response from me is way better than it was even before my anxiety problems. Way better. Like, I don't have to pick that fight. I don't have to be in that fight. I don't have to fight that. I don't have to resist that. Like, you become very discerning in terms of what really is important and deserves that level of attention. That is one of the biggest things. I have a bunch of stuff, and that's why I'm writing a whole book about it. And that'll be out probably in the winter, early 2022. But that's why I'm writing a whole book about that. So I could say it was Lisa who sent in that question. It's a really good one. But that's one thing that anxiety gave me, the recovery process gave me, was an absolute superpower in terms of more accurate and appropriate assessment of what is a threat and what requires like that crazy level of attention in life. It's a big deal. We'll do one more before I get off the horn here because we're hitting the half-hour mark, and this is fun. I need to do this more. Let's see here. Okay, this is cool. So anxiety disorder makes me feel like I can't make long-term plans until I'm recovered. Any advice for that? This is a good question too, right? My answer to that would be, well, I think you're ready because you asked the question, so I think you already know the answer, which is that's not correct. In The Anxious Truth, the book that I wrote, the recovery guide, the big 400-page guide, I talk a lot about this. And I talk about how, in many ways, when you first start out on the path of recovery, everything is recovery, right? Everything you do, every task you do, every activity you do, every decision you make, you relate back to recovery. Is this going to make me better so that I can get back to life? I'm trying to get back to my life, trying to get my life back. So I have to do special recovery things all the time when I'm awake so I can get back to living. But as you go down the path and you begin to learn the lessons and you get more experience, that line begins to blur. And you don't think of everything in terms of recovery. You start to think of life again, right? You just actually start to think of living your life. And you'll find yourself just shopping or running errands or just engaged in activities that you would just normally be engaged in if you were a non-anxious person. Like, so what starts to happen after a while is that things begin to blur together. Like recovery becomes life and life becomes recovery. I wrote that in The Anxious Truth, and it's one of the parts of the book that I know resonates with a lot of people. They love it. And honestly, I love that I wrote it because it's true. Like recovery is life and life is recovery. So in the beginning, it's normal to feel this way. Oh, I have to first recover, then I can live my life, which would include making long-term plans, like maybe relationships or careers or moving to another city or going back to school. But that's not true. Like give yourself a little bit to get going in recovery. That's going to be normal. You think that recovery happens and then life starts again, but you will see that you are living your life while you are recovering. And if you do it right, and I hate to say right, but if you keep at it and you keep expanding your horizons and you keep getting better and learning the lessons and integrating them and muting down, right, that overactive threat response that drives your disorder, you will start to see that life begins to hand you your next recovery lessons organically. It will just give them to you like gifts. You don't have to go looking for them. In the beginning, you have to go look. I could do my exposures. I have to drive. I have to walk around the block. I have to bring my kids to school. I have to sit by myself for a half hour at home. You have to go looking for the lessons. But as you go down the road and start to learn the lessons, life will hand you the next set of lessons just organically. So you don't have to wait to be recovered to start making your life plans. You only have to start recovering so that life and recovery begin to sort of mix together. And then you'll find that you're making your plans. One day you'll discover like, hey, look at me. I'm on Zillow looking at new houses because I think I want to move. Or, hey, look at me. I'm on, the university website because I think I want to go back to school. You won't be thinking about it. There won't be a day that you'll say, okay, I'm recovered now so I can make my life plans. That won't happen that way. So start your recovery. You will be a little bit fixated on it right now, and you'll think that life and recovery are two different things. But as you go down the road, you will see they begin to merge together so that you don't have to wait for the magic day that you are somehow recovered in order to make your plans for life. It will just happen organically. All right, peeps, I'm 33 minutes into this. I could answer questions for 3 hours, but I just can't really do that. We'll do it again, and maybe I'll try and save some of these questions for maybe Recovery Room on Fridays on Instagram, or I'll try and save them for Instagram Lives or something. But for those of you who sent in questions, thank you very much. I hope I was able to answer your question either directly or indirectly. Like I said, I'm going to try and do this maybe once every 3 months so we can do 4 Q&A podcasts every year because they're really cool, and I hope you get something out of them. And that's it. So I'm going to ask you the same favor that I ask every week at the end of a podcast, which is if you are enjoying the podcast and you're listening on a platform that allows you to rate or review the podcast, then leave it a 5-star rating if you dig it. And then maybe take a second and write a review. Because when you write a review for the podcast, it helps other people find the podcast. And then more people can get help. And that's why I do this thing. And that is it. Thank you for coming by and spending your time with me as you do every week. I so appreciate your attention and your support for all the stuff that I'm doing. I really, really appreciate you guys, the feedback, the support, everything, the enthusiasm. So it's all great, and it all makes me feel good, and I appreciate every one of you. And as always, I will leave you with Afterglow by my buddy Ben Drake, who so graciously wrote this song based on some of the stuff he got from this podcast. and allows me to use it as the intro and the outro. You can find Ben at bendrakemusic.com. Hope you enjoy it. See you guys next week. And remember, this is the way.
This is where your story begins. You got the feeling that you're gonna win. Yeah, you're doing fine. Now in the city and you're living fast. No looking back or dwelling on the past. You know you'll never get another chance. So go and